Israel's offensive in Gaza caused widespread death and injury. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate ceasefire, but Israel's caretaker Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insisted that the offensive would go on as long as necessary. World leaders expressed their concerns, Pakistan prominent in demanding a ceasefire. The UN General Assembly held an emergency session, and Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi was there looking for consensus to put an end to what he called the atrocities in Palestine. But what role does Pakistan play, given the geopolitical dynamics and as some of its key Muslim allies normalize relations with Israel? Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi talks to Al Jazeera. Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Foreign Minister of Pakistan, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. How would you characterize Israel's actions in Gaza over the last weeks?
Barbaric, inhuman, uncalled for. The excessive use of force on the 27th of Ramadan, attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque was unacceptable, and that triggered off the crisis.
Minister, what's your reaction to news of a ceasefire having been reached?
I'm very happy about the news. I hope it holds. Past experience shows that it did not hold in 2014, but I hope it holds.
Is there any indication as to what suddenly transpired, though, to make Israel realize that it couldn't go on?
I think public pressure was building up. Public pressure was building up all over the world, and they realized that they were losing the media war. Nobody expected such a sharp people's reaction. The governments responded later. The people reacted first. And this is the qualitative change. One, I think Israel was not even expecting the reaction within the mixed cities in Israel. Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, confronting each other in Israel. That is a new, unprecedented development.
As part of your efforts here at the UN in New York, though, you did convene a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And again, you said in the speech that and you said before that the Muslim Ummah must defend the Palestinians. I'm curious, though. Members of the OIC include Sudan, Morocco, the UAE, Bahrain, who have all normalized their relationships with Israel under the Abraham Accords. Do they feel the same way? Do they feel that the Palestinians deserve to be defended anymore?
They justified it, that this was a step towards peace, normalization. And the Israeli reaction, I would think, would somewhat disappoint them.
Was there any indication of that at the meeting? I know they sent envoys, they weren't terribly...
Well, if they gauge the sentiment within their countries, street sentiment, they will realize that people were disappointed.
But you said that the Palestinian issue had gone on the back burner. I mean, you can't get a better example then than these nations normalizing relations. Do you think anything has changed now, or will we be back in the same situation as we were before? And indeed,
I think
in a few years' time, Israel will do the same thing. It'll mow the grass once again.
You cannot shove the Palestinian question under the carpet for too long. It'll resurface. You can look the other way, but then it's simmering.
Well, that brings us neatly on to the Biden administration's reaction to the bombardment. How do you assess Washington's reaction to the Israeli killing of hundreds of civilians in Gaza?
I think they were slow. They should have reacted and acted speedily, and they could have saved some lives. This is an administration which is a very experienced administration vis-a-vis foreign policy. So one expected a quicker response. This delayed response sort of gave an impression that they were not prepared to deal with a situation like this.
But isn't it precisely that experience that suggests this wasn't being caught unaware? This was a very calculated delay, a very calculated response. I mean, Obama did the same thing, of course. Let Israel do whatever it has to do, kill as many people as it has to, and then Obama will eventually, he eventually would then say
but then,
yes,
Democratic Party has always spoken about human rights.
Well, Antony Blinken just a few weeks ago said that the Biden foreign policy would have human rights at the center of its foreign policy.
And you saw how international law and humanitarian law was being violated. So, with this good news, I think attention will now focus on the Human Rights Council. I hope democracies in the West do not overlook the human issue.
But that's precisely what Joe Biden did, and as you said, with a great deal of experience, which suggested a great deal of calculation that if things did deteriorate in the Middle East, that was going to be his position based on his experience, his decades in Congress. And no matter the humiliation, once again, Benjamin Netanyahu, the day after Biden asked for de-escalation, escalated. So humiliation, he's prepared to go through that because he feels it's necessary. This is calculated, surely. This wasn't just being called off.
I wouldn't say that. Perhaps they were trying, and perhaps I have no inside information. I'm guessing. Perhaps Prime Minister Netanyahu was playing politics, to regain lost political ground. And for that, he had to flex muscle. He had to show to his electorate that he's a strong man, he means business.
So Biden was prepared to sacrifice his standing in the world in order to...
No, perhaps they kept trying. And the engagement that I had with Secretary Blinken, he did tell me that an extensive diplomatic effort was underway. So...
What was he going to say? I mean, a few weeks ago, Antony Blinken said that human rights would be the centerpiece of American foreign policy. That's completely in tatters now.
Yes, but then now it's time for them to demonstrate and show to the world that they believe in human rights.
But surely the lesson is here that there is a ruthlessness in Biden's foreign policy approach, which is once he's made up his mind that Israel is the ally in the region, that the US doesn't want to get involved in another Middle East conflict, he'll stick to it. It's fine. If hundreds of men, women and children are killed in their beds in Gaza, it's a price that he feels is worth paying then. And that shows a ruthlessness in his decision-making.
The question is, the US cannot remain indifferent. They are a global power. They cannot look the other way. They have responsibilities. And there are many Americans who feel in a particular way. If they did not, you wouldn't have seen the demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations in Chicago, in Michigan, and in other US towns.
I suppose where this is leading as far as Pakistan is concerned, though, and as we look at a Biden foreign policy agenda, is the suggestion, certainly that I gleaned, though, was once Biden's mind is made up, even if it's only in the short term, until his mind changes again, but once he's dismissed a country or a people, he'll have no qualms about sacrificing that population, clearly. And I say this in the context of Pakistan, because it's been very clear since Biden was inaugurated that he doesn't seem to have time for Pakistan. There's been no phone call to Imran Khan. There are summits which Pakistan's neighbors are all invited to, the climate change summit. Pakistan is involved, even though Pakistan is such a crucial part of the climate discussion. Envoys go to the region all the time. They don't stop in Pakistan. Does that concern you?
Point understood, point well made. But the question is, should they do that? And can they afford to ignore Pakistan? Look at the size of the country. Look at the geostrategic location of the country, right? Look at the presence of Pakistan within the Ummah, right? Look at the history that Pakistan has had with the US. We've been friends and allies in difficult times.
But that's not how they see it. I mean, towards the end of the Obama administration, clearly they just saw you as sheltering the Haqqani network and the place where Osama bin Laden was having a retirement.
Look at the need for Pakistan for peace and stability in Afghanistan. Is that over? Not yet. Not yet.
But then why do you think the Biden administration is acting in this way, given the historical role of Pakistan in theaters that are so crucial to...
I can't speak for them.
You must have a hunch, though.
I hope they realize the importance of Pakistan. And I'm sure they have found new friends in the region. But why lose old ones?
In fact, in their public pronouncements on Afghanistan, they always seem to emphasize Pakistan as one of several nations with a stake in the future of Afghanistan. They always mention China, India, Iran, Russia, and Pakistan, whereas perhaps before there was a sense that Pakistan, especially at the end of the Trump administration.
Which is okay with us, because we've always advocated that Afghanistan is a shared responsibility. You know, you cannot just focus on Pakistan. If things go wrong and you hold Pakistan responsible, no. We have played our part. We will continue to play our part for peace and stability. But it's a shared responsibility. We cannot be held responsible if there are internal squabblings in Afghanistan, if there is an infight, you know, a power struggle going on in Afghanistan. What we are saying is we seriously, with sincerity, want to see peace and stability in Afghanistan because we are net beneficiaries. After Afghanistan, if any country benefits from peace in Afghanistan, it's Pakistan.
How crucial was Pakistan in getting the Taliban to agree to the peace deal in the first place and getting the Taliban to negotiate?
Well, you can ask Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad the role Pakistan played. He has publicly acknowledged the constructive role, the positive role Pakistan has played in getting the Taliban to the negotiating table, in pushing the peace process forward, in getting a peace agreement between the Taliban and the US, the Doha peace agreement, in getting the intra-Afghan peace talks started, in building a consensus for the rules and procedures of engagement, and still trying to break the stalemate that exists at the moment.
How would you characterize Pakistan's relationship with the Taliban? There is that sense that Pakistan no longer has any operational involvement with the Taliban, strategic depth perhaps, as Pakistan used to call it. So what are you, just like trusted advisors? I mean, there is a sense also that the Taliban is getting more pragmatic itself as well.
You see, well, they have also learned over the years. One thing I think that Taliban and the Afghan government has realized, or should realize, that the people of Afghanistan, the overwhelming majority, wants peace.
Right, but in the past, the argument was Pakistan was actively preventing the Afghan government from functioning with its sponsorship of the Taliban, right? But there's that sense that relationship has changed.
How are we stopping? They're a sovereign country, they're an independent country, they take their own decisions. And we have a very clear policy of non-interference. We have learned over the years, and we do not want to meddle in their internal affairs. What we are saying is, we will be honest brokers, we will be facilitators, and that's it.
But do you think it's because of Pakistan's weakened influence over the Taliban that Washington doesn't seem to need you anymore, perhaps? Because you don't have the influence. I mean, you can't sort of win. Either you are having an operational role with the Taliban, in which case you're a nefarious actor, or you don't have an operational influence with the Taliban, in which case you're irrelevant to Washington, perhaps.
Pakistan will never be irrelevant. Mark my words. We will never be irrelevant. If you look at the regional picture, if you look at the new global challenges in the making, Pakistan will always remain relevant.
And you do get the sense, and I think you hinted at this earlier, though, that if the Taliban does renege on the deal, Islamabad might be blamed, actually, even though it's all quiet now.
Well, it's easy, it's convenient to blame people and pass the buck. But the fact of the matter is, we have in all the interactions we've had with the Taliban, we've encouraged engagement. We have told them that they have gained respectability by engaging. We have told them Afghanistan is different in the last 2 decades. It has changed. You know, you cannot live in the past, accept new realities, and move on.
And they are moving on.
And basically, it's your country.
But now
you have to reconcile.
There's talk of the Taliban and India putting feelers out with each other. That must concern you, though, surely. I mean, if the Taliban is taking you at its word and saying...
What kind of feelers?
There was certainly a suggestion that the Taliban is looking at the new reality of Afghanistan, which means that it might have to have a relationship with India and other nations once the US withdraws.
Taliban, you see, Afghanistan is a sovereign country, and they have every right to have relations with India. And they've had relations with India, you know, and we have no issues with that. What we are saying is, and we are not even objective, India playing a post-conflict constructive role in reconstruction, in rebuilding Afghanistan. We have no issue with that. What we've said is, they have their limitations vis-a-vis the peace process because they do not have, they're not immediate neighbors of Afghanistan. They do not have 3 million refugees living in their country. We do. The world has forgotten them, but we are living with them.
But you talk of Afghanistan as a sovereign country, but what it will be is a country which the US will continue to bomb at will. And surely Afghanistan will go back to the situation it's often had in the past of a great deal of jostling of great power competition. And in this case now China, India, Russia, Iran,
but
Pakistan.
Funnily, Afghanistan is one area where all the big players have a consensus. China, Russia, European Union, the US, there is a convergence on Afghanistan. They could have differences on other areas, but here, fortunately, there is a convergence.
And it's interesting to see China's growing role now, as the US leaves, and China obviously very concerned about the spillover of Islamic militancy into Xinjiang over the border. China offering to host talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban, talking of peacekeeping operations, potentially, if things get out of hand. This is quite astonishing geopolitically, though, to see China step into the role that
China, they're neighbors. You know, their interest is inevitable. And they also realize that they can help them. You know, Afghanistan would require reconstruction. Afghanistan would require investments, post-conflict investments. And China stands to gain. The economic corridor that China is building, the Gwadar port that has become operational, Afghanistan being landlocked, Central Asian republics being landlocked, right? So if there's an interest, greater interest in Afghanistan and Central Asian republics, who are part of SCO, that China and Pakistan and Russia are, then their interest is natural.
But isn't the irony then that because of the nature of the US's strategic posture, that if Afghanistan does get more involved with Belt and Road and does get more involved with China, then suddenly Washington will become interested again, because as far as it's concerned, it doesn't want China to have any influence.
What we have always advocated, it would be a mistake to lose interest. It will be a political mistake that Washington will make if they lose interest in Pakistan. It is in their long-term interest to remain engaged with Pakistan.
Well, let's talk about then the Chinese-Pakistan economic corridor, the development of Gwadar port, potentially a base for Chinese warships in the, you know, with access to the Arabian Sea. How does it feel?
It's a commercial hub.
Well, ports can be used for many different purposes.
They can be, but the choice is ours.
Well, that's the choice you've made. How does it feel to be so closely associated with the power that Washington feels is its biggest strategic enemy?
We've never wanted them to be enemies, right? We have been historically bridge builders.
Nixon to China, I suppose, is the example. The
Pakistan played a positive role. And who's benefited from that? Both. This China-America closeness has been mutually beneficial. We are friends with both. So what we are saying is, if you need our help, we're there.
Have you felt overt pressure from Washington? You spoke to Blinken to weaken your ties with Beijing, or is it just passive aggression?
I don't think they would expect us to weaken our ties with Beijing. They know Beijing has stood with us through thick and thin. Their relationship has been consistent. You know, here, every 4 years, there's a new administration and there's a new approach. But with China, governments have come in and gone. But the relationship is people-centric.
But again, when we look at the geopolitical structure moving forward then, we have now China and Pakistan getting ever closer. We have the US and India getting ever closer. Are we seeing are we seeing a potential proxy situation once again in South Asia there, where this is how things will be lined up?
I hope not. I hope not, because we are not looking for sort of a post-Cold War camp situation. We want to have good relations with the United States. We understand the significance, the importance of the United States. We value the strategic relationship with China, so we want to have good relations with both.
I mean, some say, well, this gives Pakistan, the closeness with China gives Pakistan the confidence to continue to have a rocky relationship with India, perhaps. But I mean, of course, the signs seem to be the former.
The fact is, we do not want to have a rocky relationship with India. We want to be at peace with all our neighbors. Who's run away from the composite dialogue? Who's run away from the comprehensive dialogue? Not Pakistan. Who's shied away? Not Pakistan. Who has vitiated the climate? Not Pakistan. India, 5th of August 2019, the measures they took, unilateral. They even violated the bilateral understandings between Pakistan and India, right? And they've taken unilateral actions. Now, that has boomeranged. Today, the Kashmir policy that India, BJP government is pursuing, there are voices within India that have said, this ain't going to work. Revisit it.
And the signs are very promising that the ceasefire is being honored again on the line of control. The Army Chief of Staff of Pakistan says now is the time to bury the past and move forward. He said we have the UAE dialogue that's going on, talk of a summit between Pakistan and India's leaders. Why do you think now? What has changed suddenly then, do you think?
You see, our preference for peace and stability in the region, our decision to move from geopolitics to geoeconomics, our desire to attain economic security, to promote investments, to promote regional connectivity. How can we have regional connectivity without having peace?
You know, the US doesn't look at you like this. The US just sees you purely through the prism of Afghanistan and China.
You see, we do not have to look through the US prism. We have to see what our interests are. Our interests lie in peace with India. Our interests lie with peace in Afghanistan, right? That gives us that east-west regional connectivity that opens up new markets for us, right? And we benefit from that.
There's an amazing phenomenon in the Middle East right now, though, that as the Biden administration disengages, various powers that didn't really talk to each other before are beginning to talk to each other. We hear about back channels between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example, now that Biden seems to be suggesting he means it when he says he doesn't really want to get involved. Is there a sense, though, that because the US had such a huge presence in Central Asia and South Asia, that was an impediment to geopolitical harmony in some ways? Now that they're leaving, perhaps there are bigger avenues for India and Pakistan and other nations now to properly have a dialogue without knowing that the US is in the shadows.
You know, the fact is that if tensions go down and if misunderstandings can be resolved through better communication, the region benefits. If there is an improvement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, both stand to gain. if there is a better understanding between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, both stand to gain.
But in the past, the US is always there, whereas if they are actually disengaging, it seems that diplomacy might actually flower. They were the destabilizing force.
The question is, we are geographically connected. Some powers have the choice of leaving at will. Do we? We don't. We are geographically tied. Where will we go? We have to coexist. That's why our approach ought to be different.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.